Margaret Green lived in a quiet suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. In a little white house with blue shutters and a garden full of roses. She was 59, gentle, graceful, and a little lonely. Her husband, Thomas, had passed away 6 years ago, and since then, her days had blended into one another. She lived by habits: coffee at 7, newspaper by 8, gardening until noon, and soft jazz humming through her home until evening. It wasn't an unhappy life, but it was quiet. Too quiet that morning. The sky was grey, heavy with rain. She sat by the window, watching drops roll down the glass. The world outside looked soft and blurred, like an old photograph. She had ordered a new blanket online a few days ago. One of those soft ones she liked to wrap around herself in winter. She didn't think much about it until she heard the sound of footsteps on her porch. Then the doorbell rang. Margaret grabbed her sweater and went to the door, expecting the usual delivery man, a middle-aged fellow who barely spoke. But when she opened the door, she froze for a moment. Standing in front of her was a young man, maybe 26 or 27, rain dripping from his cap, a small box in his hands, and a smile that carried warmth even through the cold afternoon. "Delivery for Mrs. Green," he said. His voice calm and clear. Margaret blinked. "Oh, yes. Thank you." She took the box carefully, her hands brushing against his for a second. His skin was cold from the rain, but his touch was gentle. He gave a soft laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Sorry, it's pouring out here. I hope your package is okay." She smiled. "It's fine, dear. You must be freezing out there. You should come under the porch at least. Get out of the rain for a moment." He stepped closer, under the cover of her porch roof, shaking the water from his jacket. "Thank you, ma'am. I didn't think the weather would turn this bad today." Margaret looked at him more closely now. He had bright hazel eyes, kind and alive, and a small scar near his eyebrow. The kind you might get as a kid climbing trees. His voice carried something light, like a story behind it, something that made people want to listen. She asked softly, "You must be new. I haven't seen you before." "Yes, ma'am. I just started last week," he said with a shy grin. "I'm helping out until I can go back to school." "School?" she asked, surprised. He nodded. "Yeah, writing school. I'm hoping to be a writer someday. Delivering packages pays the bills for now." Margaret's smile deepened. "A writer? How lovely. I used to love books when I was younger. I still do, I suppose." He looked around her porch, his gaze catching the rose vines that wrapped around the railing. "Your garden's beautiful. It smells amazing even in the rain. Are those all roses?" That made her laugh, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in months. "Yes, I've been taking care of them since Thomas passed. They're my little company now." He gave a gentle nod, his expression softening. "They're lucky, ma'am. Not many people care for things with that much patience anymore." The rain hit harder then. Bouncing off the steps, he waited a moment longer. Just talking. Nothing too deep. Just small things about books, weather, and how Oregon rain never really stopped. Margaret found herself answering easily. Her words flowed like she had been waiting for someone to listen. When he finally said he should go, she felt a small ache in her chest. Something she couldn't explain. "Thank you for the porch break," he said, as he turned to leave, his smile lighting up the dim grey afternoon. "Any time," she replied softly. "Be careful on the road, Daniel." He stopped, turning back in surprise. "Wait, how did you know my name?" She pointed at the badge on his jacket. Laughing again, he looked down, blushing slightly. "Oh, right. Guess I forgot I was wearing that." When the door closed, Margaret stood for a while, holding the box but not opening it. The sound of the rain filled the house again, but it wasn't the same. Something about that brief meeting had stirred something old and quiet inside her. Her heart, which had been asleep for years, felt a small flutter, not romantic exactly, just alive, awake, curious. She made herself tea, sat by the window, and found her mind drifting back to his face. The kindness in his voice, the warmth in his words. She scolded herself for it, shaking her head. "You're being silly, Margaret. He's just a boy," she whispered. Yet she smiled, unable to help it, that evening. As she read her book, she caught herself glancing at the clock, wondering if he was home, dry, safe, why she cared. She didn't know, but she did, and that realization both frightened and comforted her. The next day came and went, routine as ever. She told herself to forget the feeling, that it was nothing but loneliness playing tricks. Still, when she went to tend her roses, she found herself humming the same old song she hadn't sung since Thomas passed. Then, 3 days later, the doorbell rang again. The sound made her heart jump. She wasn't expecting anything. She opened the door, and there he was again. Daniel, holding another package, smiling that same smile that seemed to melt through the cold. "Afternoon, Mrs. Green," he said cheerfully. "Looks like you're keeping me busy this week," she laughed. "I swear I didn't order anything this time." He checked his list. "Well, it says here this one's yours. Maybe someone sent you a surprise." Inside was a small box of herbal tea, a gift from her niece, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on the warmth in his eyes. He stayed a few minutes again, chatting lightly, telling her about how he wanted to write a story one day about real people. About quiet lives that held deep feelings, Margaret said. "Real people don't think their lives are stories, dear." He smiled. "That's exactly why they are." She didn't realize how long they had talked until the rain had stopped. The air smelled of earth and roses again, and he had to go back to work. Before leaving, he said softly, "You remind me of my mother, M.R.'s, Green. She passed when I was young. She loved roses too." Something in her chest softened completely, and all she could say was, "She raised a kind young man." Daniel, after he left, Margaret stood on the porch, watching him walk down the street, the late sun catching in his wet hair. She felt strange, like she had just remembered something important about life itself. She realized she hadn't felt that warmth, that simple connection, in years, not since Thomas. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire with her tea, the glow of the flames dancing on the walls. Her house still felt the same, but inside her, something had changed. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like waiting, but she didn't know for what. Days passed, and she noticed herself hoping for the sound of footsteps, the soft knock, or the familiar voice calling her name. She didn't admit it to anyone, not even herself, but she found reasons to stay near the window, to keep busy in the garden when the delivery truck usually passed. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was something smaller but pure, like the first breath after a long sleep, a reminder that her heart hadn't given up completely. That evening, she placed the unopened blanket on her armchair, the package that had started everything. She smiled faintly. "Funny how something so small can bring someone so unexpected to your door," she murmured. Outside, the rain began again, gentle and steady, washing the streets in silver. Margaret closed her eyes, listening, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't feel lonely. It felt alive, full, almost like it was whispering. Something was about to change. Something her heart had been waiting for without even knowing it. And as the night deepened, Margaret found herself smiling again. Her heart soft, her soul a little lighter. Never realizing that one simple delivery had already begun rewriting the story of her life, one quiet, tender moment at a time. The days after that second delivery passed like pages turning faster than usual. Margaret found herself thinking about Daniel more often than she wanted to admit. She tried to keep busy, baking, cleaning, trimming the roses. But her thoughts kept drifting back to that smile, that warmth in his eyes. It wasn't love. She told herself it was simply nice to talk to someone who listened, someone who looked at her not as an old widow but as a person still alive, still capable of laughter. A week later, Daniel showed up again, carrying another box. "You're keeping me employed, Mrs. Green," he said jokingly, and she laughed, shaking her head. "I think the universe just likes sending you back to my doorstep." He grinned. "Well, I'm not complaining." They talked again, this time longer. About small things, books he liked, the places she wanted to visit one day but never did. He told her about his dream to travel to the mountains of Canada and write stories about people he met along the way. She listened with quiet admiration, realizing how rare it was to hear someone so young speak with such heart. After that, his visits became almost regular. Sometimes it was for deliveries, sometimes just passing by. He'd stop for a few minutes, leaning on her porch railing, sharing bits of his day. She would bring him a cup of coffee or a slice of cake. "You shouldn't spoil me like this," he said once, smiling, and she replied, "Nonsense. It's nice to have company." It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. They'd wave when Daniel's truck pulled up, curious but kind. Margaret didn't care what anyone thought. She felt alive again. Her home felt less empty, her laughter less forced. Every time he left, she'd find herself humming as she washed the cups or arranged the flowers, like her soul had woken up from a long, deep sleep. One morning, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. He looked tired but cheerful. "Rough day?" she asked, handing him a towel to dry off the rain. He sighed. "A little, but seeing this porch makes it better." She laughed softly, not knowing what to say. His words were innocent, yet they touched something deep inside her. She poured him coffee, and they sat together at her small kitchen table for the first time. The air smelled of cinnamon and rain. He looked around her house, noticing the framed photos. "That's your husband?" he asked gently, pointing to a picture of a younger Margaret with Thomas. She nodded. "Yes, we were married for 31 years. He passed away 6 years ago." Daniel lowered his head slightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring that up." She smiled kindly. "It's all right, dear. It's part of life. He was a good man." For a moment they sat in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable but full of understanding. Daniel finally said, "You know, you talk about him with peace in your voice, not sadness." She thought about it. Maybe because grief changes. It doesn't leave, but it softens, like an old scar. Still there, but it stops hurting the same way. Daniel nodded, eyes thoughtful. "That's beautiful. You should write that down." She chuckled. "I'll leave the writing to you." From that day, their friendship deepened. Daniel would drop by with fresh pastries from a bakery he liked, or sometimes just sit with her on the porch, watching the rain. Their conversations were simple but full, about dreams, memories, the strange ways people drift in and out of each other's lives. He once told her, "You know, Mrs. Green, people my age scroll through screens all day. But when I talk to you, it feels real, like time slows down." That sentence stayed with her for days. She didn't tell him, but it had been years since anyone made her feel seen that way. There was no judgment in his voice, only sincerity. It was a friendship born from two different worlds. yet perfectly balanced. As autumn rolled in, the air grew cooler, and Daniel began to wear thicker jackets. He'd still come by, sometimes helping her lift heavy soil bags or carry groceries. She'd protest, saying she could handle it, but he'd just grin. "Please let me feel useful." She'd laugh and let him. One afternoon, he brought her a small gift, a notebook with a floral cover. "For you," he said shyly, "so you can write down your thoughts. Stories, maybe memories." Margaret was touched. "That's very thoughtful, Daniel," she said softly. "I don't think I've written in years." He smiled. "Then it's about time." That night, she sat by the fire with the notebook in her lap. Staring at the first blank page, her hand trembled slightly as she wrote the first line. "Sometimes, people arrive in your life not to stay, but to remind you what warmth feels like." The next time Daniel came, she showed him, and he grinned proudly. "That's perfect," he said. "That's exactly how stories start." Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their friendship grew natural. She'd tell him stories about her youth, how she met Thomas, their first home, the little bookstore they used to visit. Daniel would listen intently, sometimes taking notes. "You're giving me so much material," he'd say. "I should put you in one of my stories." She'd tease, "Only if you make me sound mysterious." And he'd laugh, promising he would. Then, one day, the tone shifted. He came later than usual, his expression tired and distracted. She offered coffee, but he refused. "I can't stay long," he said. "I just wanted to drop this off," handing her a small bag of coffee beans. She noticed something different in his eyes, something distant. She asked, "Everything all right?" He hesitated. "Yeah, just life stuff. I might be leaving soon. I applied for a writing program in Toronto, and they accepted me." For a moment, the world went still. Margaret tried to smile. "That's wonderful, Daniel. I'm proud of you," she said, and she meant it, even though her heart felt like it had quietly cracked. He smiled back, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's what I've always wanted, but it feels strange, leaving all this behind." She nodded, hiding her sadness behind a calm voice. "That's how life works. Dear, you move forward. You carry the good things with you." He looked at her for a long moment, like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. He just whispered, "Thank you, Mrs. Green, for everything," and then he left after he was gone. The porch felt painfully quiet again. The rain started later that night, gentle at first, then steady. She sat by the window, watching it fall. The house felt empty in a way she hadn't felt in years, but it wasn't the same kind of emptiness as before. This one was softer, filled with memories of laughter, of small talks over coffee, of shared silence. Days went by without any visit. Margaret went back to her routine, but it wasn't the same. Every time she heard a truck outside, her heart would skip, hoping. Then one morning, she found a note tucked under her door. Just 2 lines written in his familiar handwriting. "Don't stop writing. The world needs your stories too." She read it again and again, smiling through tears. She placed it inside the notebook he had given her and whispered, "I won't." From that day, she began to write daily. Not about love or loss exactly, but about moments, small, ordinary things that carried meaning. The color of the sky, the smell of rain, the kindness in someone's eyes. She didn't write for an audience, just for herself. Weeks later, her niece visited and found her typing away at the old computer. "Aunt Maggie, what are you writing?" she asked, and Margaret smiled. "A story," she said, "about a woman who thought her heart was asleep, but found out it could still dream." Outside, autumn leaves rustled against the porch, and for the first time, she didn't feel the ache of missing someone. She felt gratitude for a chance meeting, for a kind young man who reminded her that connection doesn't care about age. That warmth can return to even the quietest corners of the heart. As she wrote the final line of her story, she looked at the rain through the window and whispered, "Thank you, Daniel," knowing he'd probably never hear it, but feeling somehow that he already had. And though he was gone, his presence lingered, in the smell of coffee, in the sound of rain, and in every word she wrote afterward. Because some people don't stay forever. They simply arrive to remind you that your life still has chapters left to write. Winter came quietly to Oregon, wrapping the little town in pale light and cold air. The trees outside Margaret's house were bare, the roses sleeping under frost, and her days had become slower again. Daniel was gone, off chasing his dream in Canada. And though weeks had passed, the memory of his voice still lived in her house like an echo that wouldn't fade. She didn't resent the silence. She'd known loneliness before, but this was different. This silence had warmth inside it, like the soft glow of a candle after the flame has gone out. Every morning, she made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then laughed at herself and poured one down the sink. She'd sit by the window, notebook open, and write whatever came to her mind. Sometimes memories of Thomas, sometimes about Daniel, and sometimes about nothing at all. Just thoughts drifting like snowflakes. Gentle, weightless, gone before they landed. The first snow arrived one Thursday morning. Blanketing her garden in white, she stood at the window, admiring how peaceful it looked, and for a moment she thought she saw someone walking past her gate, wearing a dark jacket that looked just like Daniel's. Her heart jumped, but when she blinked, the figure was gone. It was only a neighbor, a young boy with a shovel. She smiled to herself, shaking her head. "You really do miss that kid, don't you?" she murmured, later that afternoon, as she checked her mailbox. She noticed a plain white envelope without a return address. The handwriting on it was neat, careful, and familiar. Her heart began to beat faster. She took it inside, sat at the table, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a short letter. No long explanations. No apologies, just something honest and pure. "Dear Mrs. Green, I hope you're well, and your roses are still holding on through the cold. I wanted to tell you that I made it to Toronto safely. The writing program is everything I hoped it would be. But I keep thinking about Oregon, about our talks and the stories you shared. You once told me that love doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. I understand that now. You've taught me something I didn't even know I needed. That kindness and connection can come from anywhere. Any age, any moment. I've started writing a story inspired by you. About a woman who thought her heart was done feeling, but discovered it was only resting. Thank you for reminding me what real people look like. What quiet strength feels like. I'll send you a copy one day when it's finished. Daniel." Margaret read the letter twice, then 3 times, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. She pressed the paper against her heart and closed her eyes. It wasn't sadness that made her cry. It was gratitude. Something deep and full that words couldn't capture. That night, she placed the letter on her bedside table and couldn't sleep for a long while. Every line of his handwriting carried warmth, like a conversation still going on. She thought about how rare it was, meeting someone for such a short time and yet feeling like they had changed something inside you forever. In the days that followed, she found herself writing more than ever, not to fill the silence but to understand it. She wrote about small things, the color of morning light, the scent of rain, the sound of laughter, because that's what Daniel had done. He had taught her to see beauty in the simple, ordinary moments. Her niece visited one afternoon and found her writing by the fire. "Aunt Maggie, you've been smiling a lot lately," she said. Teasingly, Margaret laughed. Maybe I finally remembered how. She didn't tell her about Daniel's letter. It was something too personal, too precious. It wasn't a secret. It was a feeling, and feelings, she had learned, didn't always need to be explained. The snow melted slowly, turning into soft rain again. And life went on. Yet sometimes, when she walked through her garden, she'd imagine Daniel's voice beside her, asking questions, laughing, curious as ever. It didn't make her sad anymore. It made her feel alive. Like she was part of someone else's story, even from far away. One morning, she received another small package. There was no sender's name, but when she opened it, she found a thin paperback book titled The Winter Porch. The author's name on the cover was Daniel Hayes. Her heart leapt. She turned the pages quickly until she found the dedication. For Mrs. Green, who reminded me that hearts don't retire. They just wait for a reason to wake up again. Margaret pressed the book to her chest, tears filling her eyes, but this time she smiled through them. It was as if the universe had handed her proof that every small kindness, every shared moment, truly mattered. She brewed herself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch, reading the first few pages. The story began with a woman who lived alone by the sea, her life full of quiet routines. Then one day, a stranger came to her door carrying a package. And everything changed. The woman in the book wasn't her exactly, but she could feel herself in every line. Her laughter, her loneliness, her rediscovered hope. By the time she finished reading, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky with gold and pink. She whispered softly into the air, "You did it, Daniel," and for a moment, she could almost hear his voice reply, "So did you." After that day, Margaret started writing again, this time seriously. She sent small essays to local magazines, reflections about aging, memory, kindness, and finding meaning in unexpected places. To her surprise, one of them got published. A few weeks later, a stranger wrote her a letter, saying her words had helped them through a lonely time. Reading that message, she finally understood something. What Daniel had given her wasn't just warmth. It was purpose. Months later, spring arrived, and her garden came alive again. She planted new roses, soft yellow ones, and named them after Daniel. She smiled every time they bloomed, remembering how he used to compliment their scent. On her 60th birthday, she threw a small gathering for the first time in years. Her niece, a few neighbors, and the local librarian came. They sat on her porch, laughing, sharing stories. At one point, her niece asked, "What made you start writing again, Aunt Maggie?" Margaret looked out at the roses swaying in the breeze. "A stranger brought me a package once," she said softly. "And somehow, it turned into a gift I didn't know I needed." That night, after everyone left, she sat alone under the stars. Holding Daniel's book in her hands, the porch light glowed behind her. The roses moved gently in the night air. And for a moment, everything felt perfectly at peace. She whispered to the sky, "Thank you for finding your way to my door." And though no one answered, she felt something, a warmth, quiet and sure, as if the world itself was smiling back. Years later, when people asked her how she started writing so late in life, she'd always smile and say, "Because one rainy afternoon, someone reminded me that the heart doesn't age. Only the body does." She never mentioned Daniel's name, but his story lived through every word she wrote, every kindness she shared. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, Daniel sat in a small apartment in Toronto, signing copies of his book, smiling as he wrote the dedication, "To everyone who's ever opened their door to something unexpected." Both of them, in their separate worlds, had moved on, yet remained connected by the quiet thread of gratitude and memory. Theirs wasn't a love story in the ordinary sense. No promises. No romance, no forever, but something even rarer. A bond that reminded two people from two different generations that hearts can find each other in the simplest moments and change each other forever. One evening, years later, Margaret's niece found her sitting peacefully in her chair, a book open on her lap. The window beside her was cracked open, letting in the scent of roses. The letter from Daniel still lay framed on her bedside table. On the porch outside, the yellow roses swayed gently, and the wind carried a whisper through the garden. Soft, light and full of warmth, like a voice saying, "Thank you." Because sometimes love doesn't come to stay. It comes to remind you that you're still capable of feeling it, still worthy of it, no matter the years that have passed. And for Margaret Green, that simple truth became her greatest story. One that began with a doorbell, a rainy afternoon, and a young delivery man who changed everything forever.